Are we ready? Good morning, everyone. So we've got a little lighter crowd today, and I think that's because A, it's summer, and B, for some reason, some people thought this was a bus tour today. But it's always been under seminar, and the topic is how to tour a senior living community. So we're going to dig into this a little bit because I get calls all the time about, we think we want to move, or we know we need to move. We don't know where to move to, and we don't know where to go, how to start, and how to even begin this process. So we're hoping that we're going to give you some good information today about the hows and the whens and the whys and the whos of touring a senior community and beginning that process. So I will introduce myself first. I'm Dayna Wilson. Who here is here for the first time? Anybody new? Well, welcome. Welcome. We've got newbies. All right. Well, welcome, newbies. I'm not going to make the groupies do what we usually do, which is turn to your right and say, we're going to learn something today. And then you turn to your left and say, it's about time, because we don't have everyone on the right and the left yet. But we welcome the newbies, and we hope that you will come back again and see us in months to come. We are now in our 7th year of presenting a monthly panel discussion on various topics. We will be sending out, and I'd love you to take the moment when you're filling out your evaluations today, give us some ideas of what your top 3 topics would be that you'd like us to present next year. Because we want to be sure that we're bringing you the information that you really are looking to learn more about. Okay, so I'm Dayna Wilson. I'm a seniors real estate specialist with Keller Williams Realty East Bay, and I work with boomers, zoomers, and savvy seniors on the move. It is my business focus and what I love to do and the kind of people I love to work with. And because of what I do, I have been lucky enough to surround myself with some wonderful experts in the senior boomer and senior arena in all different aspects. So I love being a resource for folks in my own backyard. I grew up in La Miranda, and I now live in Rossmore. So do a lot of work in and out of Rossmore as well. So we're just going to get to this and start out by inviting some of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with Pamela and ask her to share what her role is, her experience in senior living, and a little bit about maybe even what you did before. So Pamela,
okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pam Campbell, and I have been in the senior industry for over 20 years. That sounds so weird to say, but it's true. Before that, I was a paralegal, so I worked in law firms. So I had a complete switch of careers, and I love what I do. And I am the marketing director, sometimes known as the sales director, currently at Oakmont of Concord.
Awesome. Brian.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Riddle. My agency is called Care Placement Advisors. Background, I was in the pharmaceutical industry for quite some time. I sold patient monitoring equipment in hospitals, Northern California, Hawaii, and Guam. So all the monitors that you get hooked up when you go into the hospital. Transitioned into home care about 9 years ago, so a big difference. Did that for approximately 3 years, so learned a completely side of the business than what I do now. So now I'm what's called a placement advisor, sometimes called a referral agent, and I'm an independent contractor, if you will. My main job is to help identify the best community for the senior or individual needing to transition into a community.
Awesome, thank you. Julianne and Megan. Who are you? Tell us who you are.
I'll start. Good morning. My name is Julianne Bigelow, and I started a company called CareQuest in 1997 after working at John Muir Hospital for about 7 years in physical therapy. So in physical therapy, I worked in the rehab unit. In the rehab unit, people would come through the unit maybe it was a stroke or a hip fracture or a trauma. And they would ultimately need to, if they couldn't go straight home or couldn't go home, they would need to find a community to go to. And back in the 90s, there were far fewer communities than there are today. So the case managers were more able to direct people to different communities, but with an explosion in the senior industry and so many options, the case managers were giving families lists, having a harder time telling them where to go. And so I decided that I was going to start an agency, like Brian, helping people navigate and understand the landscape of not only the options, but what would be most appropriate given what's going on. Because everybody's different, and even though these communities are all licensed the same, they are very different. They have different personalities, they have different layers of medical support. You know, they are licensed as non-medical entities, but they're very different in personality and scope of what they offer. So Megan joined me in 2019, and I'm going to let Megan introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Molo. I'm a clinical coordinator at CareQuest. And behind this young face, I worked in skilled nursing facility for 3 years as a discharge planner as well as an admissions coordinator. So I'm very well aware of the process of creating a safe discharge and understanding what seniors need to make it a safe discharge into a community or home. I have a master's in healthcare administration, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to share with you this information.
That is awesome. So we've got a panel of experts, to be sure. Before we dig into the questions that I have for them today, I want to make sure that I give a shout out to our education partners, because without them, we could not continue to bring these seminars to you free of charge. So I want to shout out to Better Days Home Care, Atria Senior Living. If you're here, there you go. Holly's waving her hand back there, so say hi to Holly on your way out. Carlton Senior Living. Who do we have from Carlton? Okay, they're not here today. Mutual of Omaha, Reverse Mortgage, Dayna Wilson, Keller Williams Realty, and Luxury International. We've got the Reutlinger Community. We've got Family Matters. Art is here somewhere. Maybe he's out in the hall. Family Matters is moving and hauling. Byron Park and the Kensington. Those ladies are back in the corner if you want to say hi to them. We've got CareQuest up here on stage. Clar's Auction Gallery in Oakland. And again, I think, Custom Moving and Hauling. They do moving and hauling. Family Matters also will do some estate liquidation as well. And lastly, Del Monte Group, financial advisors. I think I covered everybody. So big shout out to our education partners. We'll be celebrating them next month at the Bounty Hunter to give them a big thank you for their time and support and energy, as well as our speakers. So put that on your calendar. All right, Pamela. You know, in the past, now think about your grandparents or even great-grandparents. As folks aged in the generations before us, there's really only two options that people thought about. It was either staying at home, trying to figure that out, or you'd go live with family, or maybe, I don't even know, maybe there was a few what we'd call nursing homes. And that's certainly back then not where anybody wanted to end up or go. So Pamela, I know there's so many different options now. And there's licensed options and not licensed, and maybe you can share some of those options and maybe even talk about the difference between licensed and not licensed. If you would take that question on, we'd love to hear.
Sure. I'll start out by talking about what's licensed versus non-licensed. So a non-licensed community would be one that is strictly independent. It's called independent living. A licensed community is licensed by the state of California. They're called residential care facilities for the elderly. And they're licensed. We're overseen by the Department of Social Services. We have to follow a lot of licensing regulations. In independent living, you don't. Typically, you don't have to have any medical information to move into the community. We do have a couple of totally independent communities in this area. So the difference in a licensed building is if you come into assisted living, we can help you with your activities of daily living, is what they're called. ADLs is what we call them for short. And that means we can help you if you need help with your medications or with showering, escorting, things of that nature. Anything that is non-medical. All of these communities are not medical facilities. So everybody gets that confused sometimes. So we have assisted living, which is licensed. We have skilled nursing is the one that, and maybe some of you have been in a skilled nursing, you typically go there after the hospital for a short stay. They're just short stays usually. There are some that can take long-term patients, but usually they're short-term. And they're medical facilities. Assisted living, so some assisted livings, you can live there independently. You don't have to have any services, but you get all of the other great things like meals and activities and those things. But if you do need assisted living later, you can get it in your apartment. There are some communities that have sort of a hybrid where it's assisted living, a certain number of apartments, and then some apartments are independent living. So you would move within the community if you needed assisted living. Memory care, there are specialized memory care communities that stand alone, that are just support for people with dementia, Alzheimer's. They have a lot of special programming. Continuing care, CCRC is what they're called. They're sort of a hybrid model as well, assisted living, independent living. They have memory care, and sometimes they have skilled care as well. The majority of assisted livings in this area are month-to-month rentals. A CCRC is a buy-in. It's a buy-in community where you pay $1 million to buy in. Typically, those communities are for younger people that don't have a lot of health issues but want to move in and possibly continue on there as they age in place. Board and care homes are small homes that have maybe 5 or 6 bedrooms for people, and it's more, I don't want to say one-on-one care, but it's more supportive. It's really to help people, I think, and you might know better, that have more cognitive or mobility challenges. So those are the differences. Anything to add to that?
I would add that in the smaller care home, there's not as much food choice and there's not as much activity. Some people like the small care home because it's homey, but other people need more stimulation and really would thrive in an assisted living. So this is one of the things that Brian and I help people, and Megan help people determine, is what size of community would be best, and understanding the differences between them, because they're even though they're licensed the same, they are very different.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything? No. Okay, perfect. Well, we've all seen those ads on TV, those handsome actors that are telling us about different placement options that you can call, actors or actresses, saying that they've used a certain, national company for their own mothers. And, they talk about these services being able to handpick the best senior living options for you at no cost to make your research easier and less stressful. However, and we probably should have called this seminar series the Truth Series, because we really do try to, we don't sugarcoat things. We're pretty honest here month after month. But many of these advertised placement services, without naming names, are simply, they can be lead generators. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. So they're lead generators for senior living communities, and they offer a little personalized support or guidance, but they'll forward your name and information on to all the communities with whom they have contacts or contracts. But you may be on their list for 2 to 3 years. And here's the challenge that I've seen, because I know we've got some amazing local senior communities here. And some of them, I think the best ones are my education partners. But the impact of using one of these services is that now you cannot choose to work with a local expert. You can't choose to work with a Julianne or a Brian, because those 800 number places own you in a way, if that makes sense. So just, food for thought as to who you want to work with to kind of help you guide you, instead of going out and saying, well, okay, there's 40 different places I can look at, and really not knowing, well, which one is best for you, which one's going to have the care that you may want now or in the future for you or your loved ones. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Pamela?
I'd like to add one thing. Some of these big all of the national agencies, I will tell you that they have never been in my building.
Ooh.
So they don't know what's in my building. They've never seen it. Where I know Brian and Julianne have. They have been in my building. They've toured it. They have met with our staff. They know what we do, what we can't do, and all of the other local communities, they know. When you call those big 800 numbers, they're sitting in, Sacramento or somewhere else. And, they have a list, but they don't really know because they haven't been to our building. So I think it's important to go with someone local that really knows the communities, and they both have, placed people with us and other communities, so they know, and they have a good idea.
Yeah.
So Megan, Julianne, and I, the benefit of us being local is we don't transition individuals into any community that we have not set foot in. So they all look a little bit different. They feel a little bit different, right? The resident population in the communities is a little bit different. So something that we do is we're looking at citations and violations of the communities. Megan, Julianne, and I are treating our clients as if they were our own mom and dad, okay?
Awesome. Thank you. So, food for thought. Julianne, when do you normally get called? And I want to highlight that there's usually 2 different reasons, right? Lack of local support or a crisis situation. So I know you get calls like, hey, Julianne, I need some more information about senior living facilities. Dad can't live at home anymore. I'm going to need to place him somewhere. I don't know where to start. I only have a couple days to decide, where do I go,
So we all 3 of us work the same in terms of the process, but when we get a phone call, I would say most of our business is crisis driven. I like meeting people 2, 3, 4, 5 months out, but everybody, including myself and everyone here, we all think that tomorrow's going to be the same as today, right? So we don't know when that crisis is going to happen. But a lot of times people end up in the hospital system, and it's determined after the hospital or after rehab that the home's not going to work, whether it's the cost of in-home care or whether it's a lack of, like Dayna was saying, the support in the home. Or it's the architectural barriers of the home. Some people have stairs they can't navigate in multi-level homes and whatnot. So more often than not, we'll get a call when somebody's in the hospital or finishing up rehab, and there's two things that we do. Some people need short-term care, and that's called respite. And assisted livings, based on space availability, will take folks in a furnished apartment, and they can do a short-term stay. It's generally a 30-day minimum, and sometimes there's a maximum. But sometimes a respite stay is a great segue between the hospital and home for people. And other people, it's just decided that it's time, So I don't love the crisis in the sense that somebody generally has to step in and help. And you're limited to the inventory that's available as opposed to really being more thoughtful in terms of looking at, a few other communities. Like Pam is often full at Oakmont of Concord. So if somebody's in a crisis situation, that inventory is not available. So having a little bit more time when you look, then you actually can narrow it down and to the apartment and the community that's right for you and coordinate the move. But more often than not, for us, wouldn't you say for you too?
Yes.
Yeah, more often than not, it's a crisis. And that's where we shine too. It's like, because we can step in and help coordinate and organize and knowing the inventory, really sort of cull that down. And not just the inventory also, but maybe there's medical issues that need to be considered. And some communities have nurses on staff longer, and they can do like the diabetic management. Maybe they could do blood pressures. And other communities don't take those on. So one of the things we're all looking at is what's going on medically and what factors need to be considered when you're culling down the options.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I know I even get calls, and I'm ultimately a realtor, but because I'm a seniors real estate specialist, I get calls like, Dayna, I need some help. Mom's getting discharged from the hospital tomorrow. And I've called a couple of the communities that the case manager gave me, and they're full, and I don't know what to do. And I mean, this is like a real thing that happens all the time. And maybe the daughter or son or the loved one lives out of state, and they need to get back and go back to work. And so it's a real problem. So we're talking about planning. Now, we can only plan so far in advance. I know Julianne and Brian will talk a little bit about this, but I'm going to ask from the different perspectives why planning is so important. But while we're on that subject, I'll tell you, when I do a consultation for a downsizing, right-sizing move, whether it's a community, whether they're just moving to a smaller home, I ask a lot of questions that people say, well, my gosh, a realtor's never asked me these things. But, I want to talk about what kind of lifestyle choices are they considering now and in the future? Will they need transportation? What if the husband can't drive anymore and the wife never got a driver's license? I mean, there's situations like that all the time. And I ask them, how much do you want your family involved? Some people are really relying heavily on their family, their kids. Some don't have any kids. Some don't have spouses. And then they really don't know, well, who do I turn to? Who is going to help me if something would happen to me that I can't make decisions on my own? Where do you stand financially, right? So, what's your monthly income now? What's it going to be down the road? Will it change? And if so, by how much? And we've had a seminar on that earlier this year, I think, or the end of last year. If I'm going to sell my home, how much am I going to make from that? If I have an estate sale, or am I going to make any money from that I can rely on? What will the expenses be moving forward based on where I'm thinking I want to move? So, we talk about those things, and then what to do to prepare for the move. And there's a whole laundry list of things that we go over for that. But I want to ask Pamela, from her perspective, why she thinks planning is also important. So that's probably the theme today, in a way, right, is planning. And I'm always standing up on my soapbox saying, what is your short and long-term plan? And we all need one, and we all need one at any age. So, Pamela?
I would say planning is important because you don't really want to do anything in a crisis where you may not be able to decide where you're going to go. I have a lot of people that come and tour with me, and they're looking for the future. I have someone that when we opened in 2016, they came to our open house. I've kept in touch with them. They called the other day and they want to go on the wait list. They're ready because they had been to several communities, liked ours, and now they know where they're going to go. So, they wanted to make sure that happened. You don't want to have something happen in your kids to have no idea. They'll be calling one of these guys. But I think it's good to have an idea of what you want. And I think it's good to start touring communities. I think there's going to be a time at some point in our lives where we're all going to need something like an assisted living community. I have seen people who have lived at home and have had home care, and they're perfectly happy. And I think that's what Dayna was referring to. Some people really want the care to come to them and be in their home, but if you are a social person, you like to be around activities, you like to be around other people, that's something you really need to think about and plan ahead for. So I think touring different communities is a good idea because, as we've talked about, they all have different feels. We have large communities out there that are really good maybe for somebody who's younger and more active and can get around on 3 floors in a big building. Some buildings are smaller. The activities are different in each community. Some communities we have a community that's specifically for Jewish people in Danville. So there's many different types of communities out there that you can look at and decide what you want. This is about your life and what you want. So you don't want someone else to decide that. And we all know that, changes happen. Our bodies change. We could be in the hospital, as Julian said, and not be able to go home. So having that idea in your mind of where you want to go is a good idea. And every community, I believe, has a wait list. We do in our community, and if you get on our wait list, then you have first priority of moving in when there's a space. So that's something to consider too.
And I know we've talked about this before, but I've had actually quite a number of clients move into a community, and maybe they move into in fact, I have a lady right now, she moved into a 1-bedroom. We just sold her place in Pleasanton. She moved into a 1-bedroom wanting a 2-bedroom. But the timing just worked out where only the 1-bedroom was ready, and the 2-bedroom person decided to stay another month. So now she's going to move from the 1-bedroom to the 2-bedroom just down the hall. So that is done actually fairly frequently as well. So I think, the theme here is think about life now and then take into consideration what may come down the road later in life. So Brian, from your perspective, why do I have to plan after all? I've got plenty of time to plan. There's lots of options out there, and I can choose from a plethora of communities. So why bother?
So planning is important, okay? So we all have this idea, this vision of what transitioning to a community might look like, right? So we may do a transition because our care at home has become too much. So moving into a community might make more sense. We have those who may transition into a community because they want more socialization. Maybe they're feeling a little bit isolated in the home. But the answer is, I don't think you want to plan 3 years out or 5 years out. You can tour all of these communities as much as you want. The reality, most people transition into these places too late. They should be doing it sooner. So what happens, 9 times out of 10, there typically tends to be a change in condition. So we had this vision that we were going to move into a 1-bedroom apartment at this community with all of the socialization and activity, right? What we didn't plan for is that I was going to have a stroke and that I was going to require significantly more care than what a community might want to handle. Let's say I'm bedbound, for example. I need to be fed, okay? But I'll give you a really specific example. So yesterday I got a phone call from a woman in Pleasanton whose mom was just diagnosed with dementia. And so the family is worried, what do we do? How do we plan for this? So my questions were, where are we on the spectrum? How is she doing? And she's like, well, she's still cooking. You know, she can still drive. She can go and hold completely perfect conversations. We're Indian. We cook Indian food, and it's really complex to cook. I was like, okay. She's like, what do we do? I'm like, you don't do anything. You stay at home right now. We don't know how her dementia is going to progress, right? As long as she stays high functioning, let's keep her at home. As that disease starts to progress and change, maybe we're noticing some behaviors. Maybe she's starting to wonder a little bit. Maybe she's trying to leave the house. She's really, really struggling to find words, and the confusion is just getting too much. We're not just worried about mom in this case. We have to factor in dad. Because dad's condition, he's going to become tired mentally, physically, emotionally. So there is a fine balance of when we do this transition. So maybe today she's fine at home. Maybe 2 years down the road, we do a transition more to an assisted living type of community. But then again, maybe something happens in the home where the placement completely changes and we have to go to more of that smaller board and care environment. So my suggestion to her was just give me a call every 6 months and give me an update. How is she doing? Is she progressing or is she staying the same? If there is a change in condition significant, call me immediately and let's talk about what that placement might be.
That's awesome. Anybody want to add anything to that? No? Okay, cool. Pamela, when choosing a community, what are some of the things that we might be considering?
Geography, the location of where you want to be, and I get this a lot. I work at a community in Concord, and I have a lot of people from the La Miranda area who would not even consider moving in Concord just because it's Concord. So that's...
What is that? What is that about?
But when you come into our community, you might go to a community where you're currently living and not like it, but you may go to a community outside your own community and really love it. So I would sort of take that in mind and think about what kind of community you really want, you know, big or small, and that's why it's important to tour. Every community has a different feel, and you will feel it. I think of it as like buying a home. You know, when we bought our first home, we told them what we wanted, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, this and that. The realtor took us to, 10 different places, and the house we walked into was in Concord, which I didn't particularly want to live in, but I walked in and I was like, wow. I mean, I felt it. So I think the same thing happens when you go to a community. There's a feeling, and you know when that community is right for you. You want to look at, of course, what the rents are. Every place has different rents. What the buy-in fee is, how often do they raise the rents, the size of the apartments. Some of the older communities in the area have much smaller apartments, maybe studios. There are some communities that are older. Byron Park is one of them, but it was designed originally for independent living, so their apartments are big. Our community is new. Our apartments are big, so we have 2 bedrooms. A lot of communities don't. They just have studios. So that's something to look at too. And that's why you should be touring and looking at places. Look at the amenities. Almost every community has the same thing. We all offer 3 meals a day, housekeeping, laundry, transportation, activities. But they can be different variations of those things in each community. So you want to really look at that. what I always suggest too is when you're touring, you want to go have a meal there. Not so much because you want to try the food, which is important, but it could be good that day and, not good the next day. But you want to try the food, but you want to see who the people are you'll be living with. I mean, if you walk into a dining room and nobody is talking, maybe you're shy and quiet and you don't talk much and that's okay with you. Maybe you're an upbeat, bubbly person and you want to have that social conversation at dinner time. So look and see how the residents are reacting. Are they laughing? Are they talking? What's going on? How are the servers interacting with them? How is the staff interacting with everybody? So those are things that'll give you a good feel and things you should think about when choosing a community.
I love that.
In my opinion.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And then, the training of the staff, and that is evolving over time all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love to see, if you go tour, I would suggest that if you are having a meal, ask to sit with maybe some of the residents that have been there for a while and say, so what's it like really living here? And they won't have anything to hide. So, you might get the real skinny on kind of what the culture is there. And they are all different, and they're all wonderful for different reasons.
Yeah, and I want to say, when people come tour with me and I bring them into the dining room, I never sit with them. There are some communities where the marketing person sits with them and sort of orchestrates the tour. I don't. I let them go in the dining room. They can talk to other residents. They can do what they want because I want them to have the freedom to find out more, as she said.
That's almost
Yeah.
like when I'm working with a buyer, right? And we bring them to see a home. I don't want the seller or the listing agent there because I want my clients to be able to speak freely, right? And really get a feel and ask questions about the home without the seller being there. So Julianne, we talked about crisis. We talked about family members maybe calling at the last minute going, what do we do? What do we do? So how would someone begin to even know what the resources are out there? Because you and I had a good conversation about that.
Yeah. I think a very important thing to have is an advocate, because you and the advocate can start to explore together, resources and plan for the future. I had a client that lived in Rossmore, and she was worried about lack of planning because she didn't have an advocate. She had a sister who was out of state, and she had Parkinson's disease. Now, she was fully functional and independent in Rossmore, capable of staying there, but because she was worried about who would take over or step in if something did happen to her, and because she knew Parkinson's was progressive, she wanted to make sure that she moved before it became necessary so that nobody would have to step in and make decisions for her. So we toured around together, and this is probably 5 years ago. She picked a community, she moved in, and you can live in assisted living independently. You don't have to need care to be in assisted living. So anyway, she aged in place. She stayed in the assisted living. As she started to need more help, she was able to layer in care. And she's been very happy there. And the other thing that she really appreciated was the transportation. So now, because she wasn't driving anymore, so when assisted living, she could get to the doctor and she could have the meals that she wanted. She had the socialization she wanted. So there's a big difference when you do plan and when you don't plan. But if you're resistant to planning, I think it's super important to have an advocate that can talk to that person. If you don't have an advocate that you're aware of, there are people out there called geriatric care managers. Rossmore Counseling Services has wonderful resources, and of course Brian and I work with care managers all the time. So in thinking about the future, I think it's important to think about who is your advocate and to have a conversation with that person, or to call someone like Brian or I or Rossmore Counseling Services if you live in Rossmore, and interview a few geriatric care managers that maybe can step in if needed, if that time comes.
Does everybody know what a geriatric care manager is? So because that's what I'm thinking as she's talking to. I know what they are, but would you expand on that? Like, who are these people? What do they work for companies? Like, who are they?
Yeah, so geriatric care managers are sole proprietors. They're independent. They have their own business, and they're usually either licensed clinical social workers or nurses. And these are people that work in the community. They'll go to your home. They'll help you manage appointments. They will advocate for you if you're in the hospital. Some of the care managers take on more of a medical role where they're monitoring blood pressure, and the whole goal is to keep an individual out of the hospital. So sometimes people have medical problems that cause them to cycle through the hospital, but a care manager, especially maybe a nurse-based care manager that you're paying for privately, but that care manager coordinates with your medical team, coordinates with your family, coordinates with your doctor, makes sure that these nurses or social workers will look at medications, and make sure that if one doctor's prescribing these meds and another doctor's prescribing these meds, they're reconciling all those meds and looking for problems that might be happening because of med interaction, like low blood pressure. So anyway, a care manager is someone who will come see you on a maybe it's a phone consultation. Generally, it's a personal visit. They might visit you once a week. They might visit you once a month. Or maybe they're just sort of on a retainer for if something happens, I want, this person to come in and advocate for me. Do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, no, that's all perfect information. The one thing I would add actually is I engage a care manager. So there's different types of home care companies, right? We have the licensed ones, then we have the ones that aren't licensed. I like to engage a care manager for the caregivers coming into the home who are not licensed. It provides additional oversight. What is going on in that home, right? Are the caregivers showing up? Is there any financial abuse going on, any physical? So it's just additional oversight to make sure that the care plan is being followed. I also like to engage them when the children are out of state. So if we have 3 kids in 3 different states, but no one really knows exactly what's going on with mom or dad, they are the perfect person to engage when mom or dad goes to the doctor office, because they're capturing that information because maybe mom has just a little bit of cognitive impairment. So they're disseminating that information. They're jumping on a call with the family so that the family can make an educated decision on how best to move forward with mom. Okay.
Excellent. And then, I don't know, not to muddy the waters, but how would you compare a care manager, and some do work for in-home care companies and some are independent, right? Mm-hmm. Right. How would you compare a care manager to a fiduciary? A professional fiduciary.
I would say that the care manager is really taking on that whole medical piece, but not necessarily the financial piece. Fiduciaries take on the financial piece of it. So for someone who's maybe having trouble managing finances or just wants to prepare for down the road, they might engage a fiduciary to come in and help them like pay bills and keep their financial life healthy and organized, whereas a care manager is taking on more of the medical piece of what's going on. And some people have both.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say, Pam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll use my mom as an example. Don't tell her I'm talking about her again behind her back. But so even in her trust, I'm the trustee of her trust. We've got my brother, POA for health care. I'm POA for financial. But if we can't continue as trustees of her trust, we have a professional fiduciary named as the 3rd successor trustee, so that we know there's always going to be somebody watching over mom for medical care as well as financial, paying her bills and that kind of thing. the chances of having to use that the way the trust is set up are pretty slim, but you never know. So we've got that in place, maybe another thing to think about. Now, Pamela, we kind of covered what independent living communities are. We wanted to dig in a little bit more. I think you kind of covered that, though, if you want to add anything else independent, because then we want to compare the independent to the assisted living.
Right.
And so maybe I'll just jump into Brian and say, okay, what additional types of things are offered with an assisted living, which I think you and Julianne and Megan are normally helping people, find their next home in, or a board and care, it seems like. What additional things do they offer that you would like to share?
So the independent living communities, unlike assisted living communities, generally offer 2 meals a day versus 3, as in the assisted living communities. So they're not going to provide caregivers on site that are part of that community. But if you do need care, you can bring in your own caregiver from an outside home care agency, okay? So they're both going to provide transportation. They're going to do social activities, okay? So that's going to be one thing to think about. So there is really no care. So when it comes to insulin, for example, if you have someone who's diabetic, you're really going to want to lean towards being in a community that's able to assist with insulin. Because if you're in an independent living community, you're going to have to be bringing in an outside party to actually do something medical like that, okay? Which can be extremely, extremely expensive. All of the communities accept pets, but we're not going to be taking big Dobermans or anything like that. I recently did an assessment in Pleasant Hill, and the care manager's like, I think their dog's pretty cute, and she can't live without the dog. I'm like, awesome, this is great. She had 2, though. So I get to the house, I ring the doorbell, and these things are barking like no one's business. Okay, this is red flag number 1. So then the caregiver puts the dogs away. I'm like, well, why did you do that? She's like, well, sometimes they nip at your heels.
Oh.
Red flag. So you have to be careful
We're
about the
not
type
gonna
of,
take that.
they won't take one. So then we have the individuals who, they love our pets. No one wants to be, thrusted away from your pet. That's our lifeline. That is our child sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So in memory care, you're not going to really see memory care is going to want to accept someone with a pet. It's just too hard for them to do it. Sometimes they have a dog or a cat in that community. Sometimes when you transition to a small boarding care, very, very, very few will accept pets, but we have a handful, maybe just actually 2 or 3 sprinkled in there, that will take pets, all right?
Okay.
I just want to say one thing, too, about the level of care in assisted livings. Per licensing, they tell us what we can and cannot do. But within those parameters, each individual community decides what they want to do. So there are some communities that offer only light services. There are some that have nursing 24 hours, so they can handle diabetic care in the middle of the night if need be. There are some people who choose not to do anything, like there's a thing called a Hoyer lift. Let's say you're bedbound and you can't get out of bed by yourself. It's something to help you do that. Some communities will do it, some won't. So, those are some other things to look at too, especially as we're aging in place. Am I going to have to move again if something else happens to me, because we don't know what's going to happen. So that's something to just keep in mind.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. My client, Catherine, with Parkinson's, decided not to move into independent living because she didn't want to ultimately have to move again. She also didn't want to have to bring in outside care because it's a lot more expensive to bring in outside care than it is to be in assisted living, and because they have employees that provide care. So it's inside care, it's not outside care, right? So my client wanted to be in assisted living even though she didn't need it when she moved in, because she knew ultimately when she started to require care, she wanted the caregivers to be employees of the community and not an outside person coming in.
And the one other thing I was going to hit on this topic that I find incredibly important is that we have Atria, Oakmont, the Kensington, and Byron Park here. These communities accept different levels of care, but when we're dealing with people with dementia, there are some communities that pigeonhole someone automatically into memory care once they get that diagnosis. Just because someone has that diagnosis does not make them memory care appropriate. So you want to work with the 4 communities in here. For example, if you have a dementia diagnosis, if you're high functioning, if you're still social, you can still carry on a nice conversation. You have to be really careful. So if you're entering into a community, maybe one of the ones that transitions someone into memory care automatically once you get that diagnosis, if you enter into that community with some mild cognitive impairment, just be careful. Those are things that you actually have to think about.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, you guys are smart. So Pamela, we've heard about the CCRCs, continuing care, retirement communities, or life plan communities. We've had seminars just on those types of communities, but how might they differ from, let's say, an assisted living community?
So in a continuing care community, and to my knowledge, we have one, Viamonte and Walnut Creek. We have Pleasanton. And that's-
Glen Creek.
We've got a number
Glen
of
Creek,
them.
yeah, we have a few more coming. Glen Creek and Walnut Creek is also coming. So these communities usually start out with people just needing independent living. And it's designed to really age in place. They may offer one meal a day. You know, they're considering that you're pretty independent, so you're going to be cooking yourself.
Full kitchens,
Yeah,
right?
full kitchens. So, you know, that's one thing to look at. The lifestyle might be a little bit different. They might have, you know, cocktail parties every night instead of once a week. So
Yay.
just, yeah.
People
So-
perked up at the.
Yeah. So things are a little different. They probably will have bigger apartment homes. Some places, not here in Walnut Creek, but in Pleasanton, I think they have cottages or little casitas that you can live in. So they're a little more separate. So totally different than Rossmore, which is totally independent, and that's different, 55 gated community. But there's options within these communities if you do need assisted living or memory care. Typically, though, you would have to move to another apartment. You would not be able to stay in your independent apartment. You would move to assisted living or memory care. I've had a situation where there was a couple that moved into Viamonte. Her husband had dementia. They lived there for 6 months, and she realized that this was not going to work for him. He needed to be in their memory care. So he moved to the memory care, and he was the first one there because Viamonte's pretty new. So, you know, they're moving people in independently. They're not moving people into assisted living or memory care. So he was the only one there, and they really didn't have any staffing. They just didn't have anything ready yet because it was so new. So she moved her husband into our memory care. So, you know, those are some kind of things that I had never thought about.
Right.
When you move into a new community like that, if you need that extra service, it might not be there yet.
Well,
because-
may I jump in too? Because CCRCs, it's not like assisted living apples to apples to apples. CCRCs can all be different. You've got to read their contract. Many of them have all the levels of care on one campus. Some of them don't. And it's a little mind-boggling because it's too confusing. But just really think about these things. I'm going to be emailing you all a list. I'm going to send you 20 questions that will get your brains moving and a grooving and starting to think about, well, what, you know, because some of these things, common sense, but we just don't think about asking these questions when we're touring. You know, you're looking at the pretty lobbies and you forget to ask some of these really important things that have a big impact on your lives. And I think you did mention this earlier, Pamela. Different than the month-to-month leases, there is a buy-in It's almost like buying into a healthcare policy, if you will, right? A health insurance policy. I've heard them as low as maybe the high 400,000s and as high as over 2 million. So that's something to think about, and not everyone can afford that.
And you're also paying a monthly fee on top of that.
And you're paying a monthly fee on top of that. So I've got a couple that will be moving into a CCRC, and their buy-in is about $1.5 million, and their monthly fee for a couple is $12,000. So but to some people, that's, they're selling their $4 million house in Orinda, and that works for them. And some people it doesn't. And they're not all that expensive, but just read the fine print. And do you all three tour CCRCs? Yes, no, not so much?
No, because the people that come to us generally already need help.
Because they're
And so
not that
they're-
independent level that they're
Exactly.
wanting
So
to
people will look at CCRCs like looking at Rossmore, right? They're independent
Right.
and don't necessarily need to be, they don't really need our help.
That makes
because-
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
something to think about too, to your point, Dayna, is the buy-in to these communities is significant. So what you need to realize is that they're actually taking your money and they're making money off of your money. Okay, so they position it sometimes as, hey, we have a skilled nursing facility on site or associated with our site, and the loved ones in assisted living and independent living have direct access to these individuals. But the reality is even if you break a hip, if you go to a skilled nursing facility maybe a mile or two away, that community is going to have transportation to and from that skilled nursing facility so that you can actually visit them. And the average length of stay at a skilled nursing facility is really just 2 to 3 weeks. Kaiser tries to discharge the patient even faster.
2
So
days.
is it worth it? About a year or two ago, I helped move someone out from Baltimore, Maryland, where they have a continuing care community. And she transitioned into a community in Oakland, which is fantastic. The challenge was with her CCRC back in Baltimore's, she didn't get back she got back 80% of what she had originally put down, but she did not get that money back until that community actually rented her apartment.
Oh, geez.
She didn't get it back for about a year. And I would guess, if I'm a betting person, I don't really think that the sales associate was really pushing to sell her apartment, right? So they're taking that money to make money off of it. You can transition to any of these communities right now in our building, and you're pretty much going to get the exact same level of care for the most part, and you may never even need to go to a skilled nursing facility.
And I think statistically, what I've read is the majority of people do not ever go to a SNF. And this is a perfect segue to my next question to Julianne, which is what are some of the general, I guess, amenities of a SNF, a skilled nursing facility? And we hate the word facility, but that's what they're called, right? We like community better. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because Megan worked for 3 years in a skilled nursing
perfect,
facility, she's
perfect.
going to field this one.
Yeah. So a skilled nursing facility in our industry, it can also be called as a SNF because it's SNF, so a skilled nursing facility. So the majority of skilled nursing facilities are usually a short-term stay. So they have registered nursing on staff, they have physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, wound nurse. So it's very high level. It's higher level than the license of a residential care facility for the elderly because they can take a higher level of care. Usually, patients that go into a skilled nursing would go there after a hospitalization or after a surgery. So they're there to rehabilitate, to get therapy, and to receive nursing care. Now, back in the day, long time ago, these skilled nursing facilities, their role was to be able to accept a patient into the skilled nursing and return them back to their prior level of functioning. But it's not like that. So Brian is right when it comes to short-term stays in skilled nursing. So it's really important to really understand where you are at with what you want as a person, and how your health levels are, and understanding what can you do, and what your future is, and what you're looking for. So the model of a skilled nursing is really just a short stay and moving on to the next level of care, usually through going to an assisted living after skilled nursing or returning home. And those are the
Megan,
options.
what if somebody needs 24/7 medical care? Where would they move?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So for 24/7 medical care, so it depends, because there are, in a skilled nursing facility, there are certain levels of care. Like, for example, if you're there in a skilled nursing facility for wound care, or for a tube feeding, or for a trach, there are certain conditions that RCFEs or assisted livings or board and cares that won't accept those levels of care. And so if you do need 24/7 medical care, you can either have the option of returning home and hiring a nurse, which we talked about last time, that can be quite expensive. Or you can stay in the skilled nursing facility. That could be an option. Or that's pretty much it. So you can either stay home or 24-hour care, or go stay in the skilled nursing.
Because you can't stay in the hospital the rest of your life.
Can't.
Right.
You can't.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the reality too is that most people don't need 24-hour medical care. You know, most people go through a hospitalization, they go through rehab, and they might need some personal care, but they don't necessarily need medical care. If they do need some medical care up to a point, assisted living can fill that need, and that might be injections or monitoring blood pressure. But most people, it's really more a matter of personal care, right? It's a matter of bathing, dressing, grooming, hygiene, managing medications, those sorts of things that people ultimately need help with.
I used to volunteer at what was called the Ream Valley Convalescent Hospital. And that was a skilled nursing facility back in high school.
Yeah.
But things have changed. Man, they've changed. For the better, for the better. Okay, board and care. I've been to a lot of those too. Board and care or care homes. Brian, who is best suited for those?
Yeah, so Julianne and Pam kind of hit on this. The board and care, first off, board and cares are homes, literally just houses in most of our neighborhoods, okay? And they are able to accept 6 residents in the home. So there are 2 caregivers during the day, and there is 1 person at night, all right? So you go into these large communities, there's a lot of activity, stimulation, you're in your own apartment behind closed doors, so you're a little bit more independent. When someone is appropriate to transition into a board and care, they really are requiring higher level of care. So maybe they're nonverbal, maybe they're just not that social, maybe they are an incredibly high fall risk, okay? Maybe they need to be fed for every single meal. 2-person assist, so 2 people can help ambulate them. The use of a Hoyer, which Pam had hit on, to get them in and out of bed, into a wheelchair, for example. So they are environments that are quieter, but there is a lot more care, personalized care involved for that resident in the home because they require that level of care, okay? But not social environments. We have a couple out there, and we're seeing more that are starting to do activities again. Some have like little walking clubs if the residents are able to do it. Some bring in music. But in general, overall, board and cares are generally a quieter environment. Okay? But if you're in a big memory care, for example, and the resident isn't doing anything at all, and they're pretty much just in a chair or bed bound, sometimes it might be another option to consider for that person.
And perfect segue again, thank you for my next question, which is, what would somebody expect to pay in general, without naming names of communities, in general at some of these different
This is a tough one.
places. And then, so if we're looking at like, so people have called and said, well, Dayna, I went and visited this community and I visited this community. And my gosh, the first communities, their fees were half the price. That's because the first community was independent and didn't offer any assisted living. And the second was an assisted living facility, different deal. So, and then, is there a rough, like independent, obviously is going to be the least expensive, and then we go assisted, skilled, board and care, I don't know.
Well, I think that one of the important things to know is that in assisted living, for example, they have an apartment price, and then they have care fees. So if you don't need any additional caregiver support, in other words, you don't need a caregiver to come into your apartment to help you with anything, you just pay that base rate. And that base rate includes all the amenities that Pam was talking about in assisted living. So 3 meals a day, transportation, activities, help with laundry generally, and meals if I didn't say that. But if you're looking generally, if I'm just going to talk about assisted living, and there's a studio, which is just one room that's organized. There's a little kitchenette and an area for sleeping, right? There's a 1 bedroom, which is actually a separate sleeping area from the living area. And then some communities have variations of that, and a few of them have 2-bedroom apartments. So it's 2 sleeping areas and a little common living area. So the studios in our area, I would say on average run about $3,000 to $6,000 a month. Your studios more? Okay. So about $3,000 to $6,000. So less than 3, it's very hard to find inventory in this area. The 1 bedrooms range from about $5,500 a month to about $8,000 a month. I'm looking at you, Pam, just roughly.
Ours are a little more.
A little more. So $5,500 to $8,000 plus, right? And 2 bedrooms in the $7,000 to $9,000 range a month. If you're a couple, there's also a second person fee. So you might have a 2-bedroom apartment that's $7,000 a month, and your spouse or partner lives with you, then there's an additional fee for that person for the amenities and services. And that runs about $1,000 to $1,600 for that second person. So you have the first person, or just you have the second person fee, and then you have care fees only if you need them, but they're also a la carte. So you only pay for what you need as far as personal care goes in assisted living. The small care homes, real quick, that we call board and care homes, it's a room in a home, right? You don't have as much autonomy or privacy. You don't necessarily have a private bathroom. But those homes, as Brian was saying, do serve a purpose in our community. The private rooms in the smaller care homes run anywhere between $6,000 and $10,000 a month. They can go higher than that, and they can go lower than that too. So when Brian and I and Megan are working with people, we're always sort of trying to keep in mind what the budget is, so we can if we can be culling options that are going to meet that budget. Because the prices are kind of all over the board, and they can go fairly low to very, very high.
And can I jump in too? What these folks and others are so helpful with as well is I've got a lot of people that are wanting to move out of the state to be closer to their family. And frankly, most states it's a little less for cost of living in some of these different communities. And so these guys have given me referrals of other transition managers in other areas, which is very helpful too. So, if you've got a loved one that needs or wants to move back to Ohio or New York or wherever, there will be some wonderful people like these folks there as well.
And I think the important thing about that is that if you're working with a representative to help you, they should live in your community. And if they don't live in your community, you don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
You have to look ahead, meaning the price that Julianne was talking about, those are the prices today. But the reality is it's going to change. The prices of the communities will not be going down, and I don't think they will ever be going down, and they do go up every single year. So you can't look at how much you can afford today. You actually have to extrapolate that. What can I afford in 3 years? What can I afford in 5 years? So you have to factor in your care needs. Maybe today you're entering pretty independent, but what if down the road, you need help with bathing, toileting, grooming? So sometimes if I have an individual looking at a 2-bedroom, and don't kill me, Pam Campbell, but sometimes I encourage them just to look at a 1. Because if you can save a little bit of money up front, you're padding your care costs for down the line, all right? So there's a lot to think about, but you just can't look to what you're paying to today. You have to look, hey, I'm super healthy. What's it going to look like in 5 years?
But I would tell you today, if there's a couple in a 1-bedroom and you both need care, it's going to be $10,000 to $15,000. So
Okay.
that's today.
Good to know, good to plan for, good to save for. And I was going to ask this question, but I am going to refer you back to one of my previous seminars that we did completely based on how to pay for senior living. So we did one previously about that, and we dug into veterans aid and attendance and long-term care insurance. And I think for the most part, a lot of these places we've talked about have been private pay, right? Private pay. So I'm going to refer you back to that to watch our clock, because I want to make sure we now have time for your questions. So this is when you can really dig in and ask these wonderful folks your questions, and then we'll do our raffle drawing with these lovely ladies. Will come up and do that for us, and then we'll send you on your way. If I forget, because I might forget, I just came back from vacation. I still have a little vacation brain here. But we do have our next month. We'll be back on the first Wednesday of the month. And it's, what are we talking about? Emergency preparedness. So I think it's really important. There's always something new and exciting to learn from. We've got the fire and the CERT and the Red Cross, and I don't know who else is coming, but that'll be a good one. So I'm going to come around. Let's make sure this is working. Raise your hands if you have a question. Anyone? Okay. Suzanne.
The continued care facilities, are they for profit or nonprofit or a mix?
They're a mix.
And then some are faith-based, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Is it all right to ask a financial question?
You can ask whatever you want.
How does one use one's long-term care when you're checking into these places?
You want me to take it? Okay, so long-term care doesn't kick in until you actually have a need. So you can't move into assisted living and not have a care plan, or I should say, if you don't have a care plan, long-term care won't kick in. But once you have a need for care, and that can be bathing, dressing, grooming, hygiene, Pam was talking about activities of daily living, and typically with long-term care policies, to trigger the policy, you need to require help in several areas. So your policy, if you look at it, probably has a list of things that the doctor might say, okay, this person needs help with bathing and this person needs help managing their medications, and that could be enough to trigger the policy. Then generally what happens is that the policy pays you every month, and you pay Oakmont of Concord every month. So your long-term care money doesn't go directly to wherever you're living, it goes to you, but then you use that with your assets to pay for your care. But just to reiterate that if you don't have any care needs, long-term care won't kick in.
But if you have care needs at home, let's say you're at home and you want to start some home care, you can start the policy, but most policies do not pay anything for the first 90 days. So you have that 90-day period to go through. You can use the home care part of your policy if you have it and start the care at home, and then that will transition to the assisted living when you move in.
And the one thing I do tell families, make sure you call that long-term care insurance company, because there are some of them out there that maybe don't cover in-home care. So they actually, some don't cover the entire umbrella, so you just have to be a little bit careful about that before you do anything.
I've even had clients whose the companies have gone out of business,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, and they're all very different as well. Any other questions? Okay, Inga.
Does Medicare or Medi-Cal come in any kind of senior citizens living?
It doesn't.
Yeah, so Medicare is like your health care, but it doesn't cover long-term care